All right, welcome to the Temple of the Silver Stars public webinar. My name is Matthew. I'm an academic track instructor in the Temple of the Silver Star. Temple of the Silver Star is a modern mystery school founded in service to AA and is a descendant, a lineal descendant of the Golden Dawn. And we offer mystical and magical training in the Golden Dawn tradition and in Thelemic magic and mysticism in both our academic and initiatory tracks. At the end of the presentation here, I'll give you some contact information if you're interested in learning more about the Temple of the Silver Star or submitting an application to become a member. So today we'll be talking for about an hour and a half or so, we'll see how it goes, about the method of equilibrium and especially about balance and skepticism as methods of attaining equilibrium. And we'll be talking about equilibrium on a number of different planes. In a number of different contexts. We'll be talking about some symbolism, some mythology, some more practical, technical things, some Kabbalah. So we'll really be looking at a diverse range of material. And as I was preparing this class, I was really realizing how fundamental these topics are to Thelema and especially to Crowley's writings. This could really have been expanded into like an entire series. So I'm going to try to give you a broad survey and mention a number of things that I think are relevant and try to draw some connections between a number of different areas. But this presentation will be in no way like a complete survey of these ideas or their significance in Thelema, but hopefully they'll make a nice introduction to the idea, and a nice way of looking at some connections between different things that we might not always recognize as connected. So let's just jump right into it. So since we're talking about balance and about equilibrium, a great place to start is with Liber Librae, the Book of the Balance. So this is Liber Librae. Liber, of course, means book, and then Librae here is the genitive form of Libra, which means balance or scale. And this is balance not in the sense of like keeping your balance or like balance as the opposite of imbalance, but the object, a balance, like a set of scales used for weighing things. So this is literally Liber Librae is the Book of the Balance. And it's under the figure of 30, so it has the symbolic number assigned to it of 30. And we'll see why in just a moment. So before we get right into the text, I just thought we could use the title of this book as a way of jumping into some of the symbolic and mythological and Kabbalistic resonances and symbols that relate to the topics we'll be talking about today. And all the symbols here that we're about to look at, these are all things that we'll see come back a number of times in our discussion today, and that I'm sure you'll notice in lots of other works as you continue your own studies. All right, so Libra, like I said, is a Latin word meaning balance or scale. And again, this is like you see on the right there, this is a set of balances or scales used for weighing two quantities, and when they achieve their balance, it means that they're of equal weight, right? But Libra is also, of course, the name of a constellation, the constellation of Libra. And there you can see, a star chart, and we can see the constellation there, and we can see how the form of the constellation forms that balance with the fulcrum on top, and then the beam, or arm there, and then the two pans hanging from the beam. And there on the right, you see the glyph of Libra, and it's how it resembles one of these balances. And you also see on the right there, again, this is the constellation Libra, but you can see the image of the balances drawn in there. Now, Libra, as a sign of the zodiac, is the day house of Venus. It's an air sign and a cardinal sign. So Libra is ruled by Venus, and so when we're thinking about Libra, Venus is one of the first places that we go for symbolism. And because this is the day house of Venus, as compared to her night house in Taurus, this is Venus in her more active, more social, more engaged mode. So, and Libra is often said to be social and be interested in social, harmony and social interaction, right? And so Venus always has those ideas of both of harmony and of goodwill and of pleasure, and also ideas about fairness and equality are also Libran qualities. And in Libra, the planet Saturn is exalted. And one way we can think about, why Saturn is exalted in Libra is that because Saturn, always has these ideas of restriction and control and setting boundaries, rules, limits, and things like that. So if Saturn is in Libra, which is a place where there's concern for fairness and for harmony, for justice, equality, balance, equilibrium, Saturn will naturally be able to fill his duties in a way that are beneficial. Right? If you're going to impose rules, imposing fair, just rules that contribute to harmony is probably the way to go, right? Yeah, so of course, there's so much we could say about the zodiac sign Libra, but that is probably a good little intro here. So now, just move from taking this image of the balances or scales. I thought we could look at some of the mythological resonances with this image. So these forms of balances are used, have been in use by human civilization for thousands of years, and of course that naturally shows up in a lot of cultural and religious and spiritual symbolism. These are in use in Egypt for thousands of years, and so probably the most well-known and most prominent use of the balances in Egyptian mythology is in the weighing of the heart. So the image you see there on the right, that's from the Papyrus of Ani, one version of the what's commonly known as the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but is more properly called the Book of Coming Forth by Day, which is a manual including spells and advice and other things for assisting the recently deceased to navigate the underworld and the ordeals that are faced in the underworld. And so one of the most crucial of these ordeals is the weighing of the heart. And so here we see the recently deceased, and this of course is the god Anubis there on the right. And so on the left pan of the balances here, this is the deceased's heart. And then on the right, we see the feather of Ma'at. So that on the left there is an image of the goddess Ma'at. She's sometimes portrayed with wings, sometimes not, but sometimes she's just portrayed as a human woman, but she always has the feather above her head. That's the characteristic glyph of Ma'at, and the feather is the hieroglyph is used to write her name. So Ma'at represents justice and order, both in the cosmic sense of the universe functioning and the laws and the harmony and order that keep the entire cosmos functioning, as well as when I think of like human law and the rules and all of that keep human civilization functioning. And if you know anything about Egyptian mythology or Egyptian culture, this was a really big concern for them. There's always the fear of chaos. And there's the linking between human, order and cosmic order as well. The idea that if human social structures break down, it'll actually be a kind of like cosmic breakdown. So Ma'at and the maintenance of Ma'at, the ordered, just, harmonious functioning of both human society as well as the cosmos itself is a major concern for them. And Ma'at is really seen as the principle. Again, she's obviously personified as a goddess, but they also understand, or understood as a goddess, not just personified. But they also understand Ma'at as more of like an abstract principle, meaning something like, justice, balance. And this is really the center of not only the social organization, but also the Egyptian sense of ethics. Doing Ma'at and living by Ma'at is really the core of the Egyptian sense of ethics. And so her feather, then becomes, one of the symbol of this principle and of ethics and of truth. So the idea of the heart being weighed against the feather, again, that's the heart on the left pan of the balances, and then the feather of Ma'at on the right. The idea here is of the heart being like the seat of the soul, and so the soul and its deeds are weighed against the principle of Ma'at. The idea that like wrongdoing and wrong action, those would weigh down the heart. And so if the heart is heavier than the feather, then the deceased does not pass and is devoured. Let's see. Yeah, so especially early on in Egypt, Ma'at is one of the extremely important goddesses, and the principle of Ma'at is really central. Later on, Isis takes over some of the functions of Ma'at. And like I said, sometimes you'll see her portrayed with the wings there. And similar to Isis is sometimes portrayed with wings as well. And both of them were said to be able to beat their wings, and that the air generated by the beating of wings was able to revive the dead. And so, yeah, I think you have this idea there of like vivifying and a life-giving effect that, again, it's not just like the rules that we all have to follow, but it's also the principle that allows life to continue. And Ma'at is often associated with substance and those things that are necessary for life, like, you know, breath, water, food. You know, these things are often associated with Ma'at. All right, and then now in the Greek and Roman traditions, we also see, you know, similar ideas about justice, and again we see the balances or scales used. I think it's likely, and from what I've seen, others have speculated this as well, that the use of the balance and the scales in Greek and Roman culture was influenced by the Egyptian use of those as well. So this isn't like an entirely separate thing. So in Greek mythology, we have a couple of different figures are sometimes associated with these same sort of ideas of cosmic, of justice and of harmony, and are associated with the symbol of the scales. First, we have Themis, who is actually one of the Titans. And she is more associated with the idea of like cosmic justice and cosmic harmony, or like the laws that govern the cosmos. And then you also have, who's actually one of the, Themis and Zeus have a daughter, well, several, but one of them is Dike, who in Roman mythology is known as Justitia or Justitia, which is the Latin word for justice. So Dike or Justitia is the daughter of Themis. She's very often portrayed holding the balances. And she represents more like a human sort of idea of justice and balance, rather kind of as opposed to like the cosmic thing. Whereas Ma'at really represents both of those things. There's a little bit of a distinction there in the Greek and Roman tradition. And then that personification of justice, you know, as the goddess Dike, that leads to the whole, you know, even into the Christian era of portraying, you know, or personifying, you know, justice as a woman, generally holding balances, and at some point also she also begins to be portrayed holding a sword. Now, classically, you know, the sword is like a symbol of authority, and, you know, the authority of like kings, you know, and even the penal authority, you know, the executioner's sword is not entirely extraneous to this symbolism. But I think for our purposes, rather than thinking of the sword as a symbol of authority or of like penal authority, I think we can think of the sword as a symbol of reason and of the use of the mind. If you're familiar at all with like the 4 elemental weapons, you know, of the wand, the cup, the sword, and the disc, you'll know that, at least in some presentations anyways, the sword is really associated with the use of the mind and the use of reason. And this is something Crowley talks about a lot, like in book 4. He talks about the sword as as emblematic of the human reason and its ability to divide things and to analyze, right? Like if you think of the alchemical principles of Solway at Coagula, right? Solway or analysis is the breaking or separating of things or breaking things apart, and it's very much like the action of a sword to divide things. So in all this, we see the symbolisms of duality, where the sword breaks things down and divides things. We also have the idea of the balances or scales that weigh things against each other. So there's a lot of these images of unity and duality and the relationship between those things. All right, let's just keep moving along here. We've got a bunch of stuff to get through. All right, and so all that symbolism that we just saw there in the last 3 slides all really comes together in the symbolism of Atu 8, the Atu of the Major Arcana, which is in the Thoth deck, the Crowley-Harris deck is called Adjustment. Now, formerly, like in the Golden Dawn decks or in the Marseille deck, this card was known as Justice, but Crowley renames it Adjustment. So let's see. Oh, actually, I'll say something about the renaming. One thing that I noticed in the cards that Crowley renamed is that so some of the tarot cards, some of the major arcana are drawn from Renaissance iconography depicting like the Christian virtues. And so not all 7 Christian virtues correspond to major arcana, but like justice, temperance, strength, and maybe one other. I can't remember off the top of my head, but those were all like Christian virtues, and the iconography of those tarot cards are all drawn from like Renaissance images depicting the Christian virtues. And those are all the cards that Crowley gives new names to, right? So, you know, strength is renamed as lust, temperance is renamed as art, and justice is renamed as adjustment. So part of it is just a kind of de-Christianizing of the symbolism here. But another thing Crowley talks about too is the idea that in the change from the name of justice to adjustment, he's really emphasizing the cosmic nature of these things, that not like the human ideas of justice, and especially not the human ideas of morality. That here we're talking about adjustment as or justice as the actual laws of the universe. Sorry, the cat behaving badly back here. What's he saying? Right. So adjustment here as the laws of the universe, the laws of actual reality. And so we might think here of the law of karma. But it's important that we think of karma in the true sense of karma as like the law of cause and effect. A lot of times when you hear people, you know, nowadays, and especially kind of maybe New Age or yoga type circles, people talk about karma in a very like Judeo-Christian moral sort of way, that, you know, if you do something bad, then something bad will happen to you, or if you do something good, then something good will happen to you, as if karma were like a moral force. But both for Crowley and, you know, like classically in the Indian tradition, karma doesn't have this like a sense of moral justice or of taking like retribution on wrongdoing or the breaking of moral rules, but simply that actions have reactions. And so Crowley talks about how even to drop a pin affects the rest of the universe, that any change, any action at all necessarily causes a reaction in everything else. And so if we think, especially kind of Buddhist or Indian ideas about interdependence, you know, in the sense that nothing is just individually existent, but everything is part of and is connected to the whole. If any part of the whole changes, the whole necessarily adjusts around it. And so this idea of adjustment as a cosmic interrelationship and a dynamic balance between all the members and all the pieces of the cosmos, I think, are all very much relevant for for our understanding of this symbolism. So this Atu here, adjustment, corresponds with the Hebrew letter Lamed, and then you can see the letter there just to the left of the word adjustment. It's the Hebrew letter Lamed, and Lamed has a value of 30, which we saw as the number that the Book of the Balance was written under. And the letter Lamed also corresponds in the astrological, the Yetziratic correspondences of the Hebrew alphabet. It corresponds with Libra, which is the sign we've been talking about. And then we also have the esoteric title of the card is the daughter of the Lords of Truth, the ruler of the balance. And so again, obviously the ruler of the balance should be obvious by now, but this idea of the daughter of the Lords of Truth, again, we have that relation to Ma'at and the idea of truth and cosmic truth. Yeah, so in her symbolism here, of course, we see she's depicted with a double feather on her head. So this is not the style of feather that Ma'at is most commonly given, but is this double feather here. And Crowley talks about this double feather being relating to the idea of the two truths, which he may mean in the Buddhist sense of the two truths doctrine, the idea that there's like a relative truth and then an ultimate truth, so that, relatively speaking, something might be true of me and not of you, but whereas ultimately there's no actual distinction between individuals. And so it's not just that there's like the world of duality and then the world of unity, but there's even a balance between those two things. Like we think of samsara and nirvana, that's a similar idea, the two truths doctrine. But Crowley really emphasizes duality in this card. And so we can see that, again, she's got the sword here. And we see how perfectly balanced she is. She's standing on her tiptoes here. And the card is, really perfectly symmetrical. And we have the two scales here. And upon the scales, we see the Greek letters alpha and omega. Now, alpha and omega are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. And so they really become symbols of all polarities. They be like beginning and ending as alpha and omega. You even use that as an expression. The alpha and omega of something is the total thing, right? The whole truth, the beginning and the end. But we can really think of this as one form of representing all polarities and all dualities and the balance between them. Let's see. Yeah, Crowley also talks about. I didn't mention on the last slide when we were looking at the Lady of Justice images there. It's not until, I think, in the Renaissance tradition that there starts to be the iconography of the Lady of Justice as blindfolded, and you see that a lot. That image of Justice is blind. But interestingly, that's not part of the classical iconography there. So I don't know. That might be something to think about. Why do we want justice to be blind, and what does it mean for justice to be blind? But here, it's interesting, she has some of the image of the blindfold, but she also has eye slits here. So it's kind of like playing on that same symbolism, where it's like a blindfold, but it's not actually. And so Crowley talks about the mask here being like the mask of Harlequin. So you have the idea of a play or a dance. And I think especially with the way that she's balancing on her tiptoes, that symbolism of a dance and of a dynamic balance, and also of skill and the ability to adjust to conditions and to keep balance and not to become imbalanced are all really relevant here. Oh, yeah, David's just pointing out that she has the eye slits, yep. Yeah, and so we have also the images of dark and light, and we see that in the colored spheres around her there. We have this balance between dark and light. So yeah, again, a card of balance, but also of duality and of the play of dualities. Similar idea of Maya being the world of duality, but it's also as like the dance or the play of illusion. Even if ultimately, all things are one and aren't separate, we live here. We can understand the dualistic world of separate things, not as simply a bad illusion to be gotten rid of, but as a dance or a play and a joyous thing. So I think all that symbolism is coming in here. Yeah, and David's also pointing out here the tie-in with Atu Zero, with the unmanifest and the manifest. Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge topic, of course. But yeah, and I think you get it exactly right. That where the Ma'at is like this card adjustment here is like the manifest. It's the dualities of separate. The duality is like separated and distinct from each other, whereas the Fool is the dualities united and brought back to that state of the zero. And we'll really see this symbolism of the idea of like a unity or even like a zero kind of condition of non-existence dividing into equal and opposite polarities, and then the idea that those things can be united again and returned to their like primordial unitary state. So yeah, absolutely, the Fool and adjustment definitely symbolize those two states. Let's see, Jeremy says, let's see, we've got a couple of questions coming in here. Let's see. Yeah, Keith is commenting on that idea of it not being a bad illusion. Yeah, definitely. And if you think of it as a bad illusion, that itself is a very dualistic way of looking at things, because you're saying like, oh, there's truth and that's good, and then there's illusion and that's bad, right? So you're actually being dualistic when you make that distinction. Whereas if you say, there's these two truths and these two different ways of approaching things, but each are we don't need to make that kind of dualistic distinction of that one is good and one is bad, one is to be avoided, one is to be, rather we can just, find peace with the fact that there's this interplay back and forth between the relative truth and the ultimate truth. Right, illusion is real. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that it's not illusion, but it is a thing. Yes, absolutely. Let's see, and Jeremy was asking if it's of note that the structure rests on the four spheres. Yeah, definitely, and especially in Crowley's work, definitely has like the symbolism of law and of order and of structure, and we can think about like the tetragrammaton. There's very often a fourfold image of the nature of things and the nature of reality. And we think of the four elements. All of that is definitely relevant. All right, so yeah, so the Book of the Balance here, Liber Librae, the Book of the Balance, under the figure of 30. So that should be more clear what all that symbolism is here. So now the Book of the Balance isn't too long, so I figured we could go through the whole thing. I won't comment on every, it's just 22 verses. I won't comment on every single one, but I'll just make a few comments as we go along. All right, so learn first, O thou who aspirest unto our ancient order, that equilibrium is the basis of the work. If thou thyself hast not a sure foundation, whereon wilt thou stand to direct the forces of nature? So pretty straightforward, but really emphasizing this idea that equilibrium is the basis of the work. And by work here we mean the great work, right? The spiritual path is based on equilibrium. Know then that as man is born into this world amidst the darkness of matter and the strife of contending forces, so must his first endeavor be to seek the light through their reconciliation. So here we bring together a couple of symbolisms. The darkness of matter here is being equated with the strife of contending forces, right? And so coming back to those ideas of the world of duality and of separate things, that state of duality really is the darkness of matter, and that we seek light by the reconciliation of those opposites, which means both they're balancing and they're unifying, as well as ultimately they're rejoining and reuniting again. All right, thou then who has trials and troubles, rejoice because of them, for in them is strength, and by their means is a pathway opened unto that light. So again, through your own struggles and your own trials and troubles, you can find this like cosmic or cosmological process of dualities and the strife of contending forces. We can understand our own lives and our own trials and troubles as manifestations of that universal experience. How should it be otherwise, O man, whose life is but a day in eternity, a drop in the ocean of time? How, were thy trials not many, couldst thou purge thy soul from the dross of earth? Is it but now that the higher life is beset with dangers and difficulties? Hath it not ever been so with the sages and hierophants of the past? They have been persecuted and reviled. They have been tormented of men. Yet through this also has their glory increased. Rejoice, therefore, O initiate, for the greater thy trial, the greater thy triumph. When men shall revile thee and speak against thee falsely, hath not the Master said, Blessed art thou? So you'll see that's that idea, and then last verse there, that's coming from the Gospels, right? This is from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and I didn't mention this. Well, I'll mention it now. The Book of the Balance here is actually Crowley's rewrite of an earlier Golden Dawn document that was given to Golden Dawn initiates, and Crowley's rewrite has a lot of removal of Christian symbolism, and especially the removal of the original version of the book praises the ideas of like self-sacrifice. So Crowley's kind of revising this to make it more harmonious with Thelemic principles. But some of that Christian and biblical symbolism does remain here. All right, so just moving right along. Yet, O aspirant, let thy victories bring thee not vanity, for with increase of knowledge should come increase of wisdom. He who knoweth little thinketh he knoweth much, but he who knoweth much has learned his own ignorance. Seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him. And so this idea of he who has learned much has learned his own ignorance, this definitely taps into our ideas about skepticism and some of the things we'll talk about skepticism here. So that, and again, we can see this is a kind of balance, right? That as your knowledge increases, you're also learning your own ignorance, so that you don't become unbalanced, by your vanity or inflated sense of knowledge. That there's a balance between, a kind of Socratic understanding, that idea that like Socrates is the oracle says that Socrates is the wisest man because he knows that he doesn't know anything. That idea is kind of like the balance of striving to increase our knowledge and to learn. All right, let's see. Be not hasty to condemn. Be not hasty to condemn others. How knowest thou that in their place thou couldst have resisted the temptation? And even were it so, why shouldst thou despise one who is weaker than thyself? Thou therefore, who desirest magical gifts, be sure that thy soul is firm and steadfast. For it is by flattering thy weaknesses that the weak ones will gain power over thee. Humble thyself before thyself, yet fear neither man nor spirit. Fear is failure, and the forerunner of failure, and courage is the beginning of virtue. So again, some practical advice about maintaining balance. And when we see weakness here, I think we can think of, or one way that we can approach the idea of weakness is as like things that would tend to bring us off balance. So that if the spirits, flatter thy weakness and lead you to imbalance by tempting that imbalance. But there's a balance between, again, humility and self-respect that is the proper way of not falling into imbalance on one side or the other, but of maintaining that middle balanced position. Therefore, fear not the spirits, but be firm and courteous with them, for thou hast no right to despise or revile them. And this too may lead thee astray. Command and banish them, curse them by the great names if need be, but neither mock or revile them, for so assuredly wilt thou be led to error. A man is what he maketh himself within the limits fixed by his inherited destiny. He is a part of mankind. His actions affect not only what he called himself, but also the whole universe. So again, this idea that we've already mentioned about the interdependence of things, that part of this balanced idea is to understand that you yourself are not separate from the cosmos. That the individual will, of course, is of central importance. So this isn't about like giving up the self or giving up the individual will, but of understanding that the will is interdependent with all things, and that the change in any part of the whole affects the whole. Worship and neglect not the physical body, which is thy temporary connection with the outer and material world. Therefore, let thy mental equilibrium be above disturbance by material events. Strengthen and control the animal passions, discipline the emotions and the reason, nourish the higher aspirations. So again, we see the idea of balance, on multiple planes here, of mental balance, balance of the passions, balance of the emotions, and the balance of each of these different components of human life and the human self with each other, so that we are, properly directing our forces towards the accomplishment of the true will. Do good to others for its own sake, not for reward, not for gratitude from them, not for sympathy. If thou art generous, thou wilt not long for thine ears to be tickled by expressions of gratitude. Remember that unbalanced force is evil, that unbalanced severity is but cruelty and oppression, but that also unbalanced mercy is but weakness, which would allow and abet evil. Act passionately, think rationally, be thyself. So this first sentence here in number 12, we're going to come back to this in a minute, because I think it makes more sense if we look at it alongside the tree of life diagram. So we'll come back to that in a moment. And then this last thing here, act passionately, think rationally, be thyself. I think one lesson that we can draw here is that the different components of us and of the different things that are woven together to make our lives each have their own functions, so that in our actions we should be passionate, in our thought we should be rational. That part of the way of having balance is that we don't confuse those things. We don't try to we don't think by our, we don't reason, using our emotions, and we don't expect, emotion to be logical. We understand the different components of ourselves, each on their own terms, and on their own plane. And that's another way that we have balance, is by using each thing for its intended purpose and not confusing those things. True ritual is as much action as word. It is will. So again, there's a lot of other stuff here that's really great and really worth meditating on and thinking about. I'm just highlighting some of the things that are most directly relevant to our topic today. But this whole text is a really great one for meditation and reflection, where it's not that long, even for memorization. And it's really good advice, on the walking of the path. I've definitely found that so many times in confronting daily life situations that a line from from this document will suddenly occur to me and will actually offer real genuine, workable, useful advice on navigating the ordeals of daily life. Remember that this earth is but an atom in the universe, and that thou thyself art but an atom thereon, and that even couldst thou become the god of this earth whereon thou crawlest and grovellest, then thou wouldest, even then, be but an atom, and one amongst many. Nevertheless, have the greatest self-respect, and to that end sin not against thyself. The sin which is I'll just pause there for a second. And so again, we can see this idea of balance, that you have the greatest self-respect, and sin not against thyself. But at the same time, understand that even if you were the god of this world, this planet, it would still be just one planet, in one corner of one galaxy in a huge universe, so that we can balance, seeing ourselves in terms of something that is so much bigger than us, but then at the same time also seeing the importance and the significance of each individual. Let's see. The sin which is unpardonable is knowingly and willfully to reject truth, to fear knowledge, lest that knowledge pander not to thy prejudices. To obtain magical power, learn to control thought. Admit only those ideas that are in harmony with the end desired, and not every stray and contradictory idea that presents itself. Fixed thought is a means to an end. Therefore, pay attention to the power of silent thought and meditation. The material act is but the outward expression of thy thought, and therefore hath it been said that the thought of foolishness is sin. Thought is the commencement of action, and if a chance thought can produce much effect, what cannot fixed thought do? So, in addition to the more obvious meaning, I think of what's being discussed here, again thinking about the ideas of balance, that if thought is the commencement of action and the seed of action, one reason that it's important to be balanced in our thoughts is so that we will then express ourselves in a balanced way, and that if our thoughts are balanced and our minds are balanced, the object that we choose to fix in our thought will not lead us to further imbalance, because that the choice of what to focus on and the choice of what to direct our attention towards will be coming from a place of balance, and we'll tend to increase that and to work with balance, and will be more effective, and will be good for us and good for everything ultimately. And we won't be led into obsession or dismay or like despair, or any of the different ways that we can come off of our point of balance in the walking of the spiritual path. I mean, of course, some amount of coming off of balance is the way that we learn to be balanced, right? So this is a dynamic adjustment. The idea of balance here isn't like a static, unmoving position, but it's like a dynamic balance of working with conditions, as they arise. It's it's like surfing, not like standing motionless, right? That you're maintaining your balance by moving and adjusting to the flowing conditions. Let's see, just keep it going on here. Therefore, as hath already been said, establish thyself firmly in the equilibrium of forces, in the center of the cross of the elements, that cross from whose center the creative word issued in the birth of the dawning universe. So this is a really profound verse here, and I think this one is really worthy of meditation. I'll just say a couple things about it. So again, reiterating the idea of establish thyself firmly in the equilibrium of forces, but here we're picturing it not just as a balance between two forces, but as a balance between four forces, in this idea of the cross of the elements. Right, so we're talking about the four elements of fire, water, air, and earth. So now we're talking about a balance that is kind of multidimensional. We're balancing both, the x and y axes at the same time. And that point of balance, that center of the cross, is associated with the quintessence, right, with spirit as the thing that is hidden behind the four elements, that gives rise to the four elements, and that the four elements, when equilibrated and unified, produce that quintessence, or the spirit that lies behind them. And so we can see that idea of the extraction of the quintessence from the elements, or the finding of spirit within matter, is directly related to this idea of balance and equilibrium. And also, this idea that the center of that cross, that place of the quintessence, is the center from whose center the creative word issued in the birth of the dawning universe, right? That creative word is the logos. And so we can think here also about the attainment of magical power, and about the ability to speak creative, that you need to be in that center of balance and in touch with those creative forces to be able to issue your own, creative word and your own, magical act. All right, let's see. So now we're going to develop some of this idea of the balance now between the four elements. So now we're going to talk about the four elemental kingdoms. So be thou therefore prompt and active as the sylphs. The sylphs are the elementals of air, but avoid frivolity and caprice, right? So that in each of these elemental kingdoms, we are trying to cultivate the balanced expression of these things, but avoid the imbalanced expression of them. So be energetic and strong like the salamanders, those are the spirits of fire, but avoid irritability and ferocity. Be flexible and attentive to images like the undines. The undines are the spirits of water, but avoid idleness and changeability. Be laborious and patient like the gnomes, the spirits of earth, but avoid grossness and avarice. So shalt thou gradually develop thy powers of the soul, and fit thyself to command the spirits of the elements. For wert thou to summon the gnomes to pander to thine avarice, thou wouldst no longer command them, but they would command thee. Wouldst thou abuse the pure beings of the woods and mountains to fill thy coffers and satisfy thy hunger of gold? Wouldst thou debase the spirits of living fire to serve thy wrath and hatred? Wouldst thou violate the purity of the souls of the waters to pander thy lust of debauchery? Wouldst thou force the spirits of the evening breeze to minister thy folly and caprice? Know that with such desires thou canst but attract the weak, not the strong, and in that case the weak will have power over thee. In true religion there is no sect. Therefore take heed that thou blaspheme not the name by which another knoweth his God. For if thou do this thing in Jupiter, thou wilt blaspheme Yod-He-Vav-He, and in Osiris Yeshua. Ask and ye shall have, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. So yeah, I think we've probably said enough about this, and we'll just move on here. But again, like I said, there's so much stuff in that document, really worth returning to and spending some more time with. All right, so coming back to that phrase now that I mentioned, that we read a couple slides back there, remember that unbalanced force is evil, that unbalanced severity is but cruelty and oppression, but that unbalanced mercy is but weakness, which would allow and abet evil. So the symbolism here is coming from the Tree of Life. And I use this slide, might be familiar to some of you if you've attended or watched the series that I did on the Sephiroth and the Tree of Life. So on the Tree of Life, we have the three vertical columns. These are the three pillars. And so we see on the left the pillar of severity, and then on the right, the pillar of mercy. And then in the center, we have the middle pillar, or the pillar of mildness. So the idea here is of evil not as a positive thing, but as an imbalance, right? That unbalanced force is evil. So that unbalanced severity is cruelty and oppression, but at the same time, unbalanced mercy is weakness, which would allow and abet evil. That it's in the balance between, it's not like we're choosing good over evil, but that we're choosing balance over imbalance. And we see in the very structure of the Tree of Life, we not only have the two extremes of the polarity, but we also have the middle pillar in the balance between them. And so we can see this at the middle pillar as the balance between a number of different qualities. including things like, again, obviously we just talked about severity, mercy, and mildness. We can also associate the pillar of severity with things like form, structure, justice, necessity. Now here, this is more justice in like the sense of like Gerbera, or like the function of Mars, rather than justice as balance. And then on the pillar of mercy, ideas like essence, liberation, energy, or freedom. And then the middle pillar is the balance or unity or synthesis of those things. Also, we find some gender symbolism here, where the pillar of severity is often associated with the female, and the pillar of mercy with the male. And the middle pillar is either both of those things united, or neither of those things, as the unity that we divide into those two, that archetypal polarity. Also with elements too, the pillar of severity is often associated with the element of water, the pillar of mercy with fire, and then the middle pillar with air as the reconciliation between them. So this idea of fire, of the four elements too, is really important on the Tree of Life. So on the left there, I have the Sephiroth attributed to the elements. So we can see that down the middle pillar, we have Kether, Tefereth, and Yesod are all attributed to the element of air, and then Malkuth to the element of earth. And then on the pillar of mercy and severity, we have the spheres attributed to fire and water. And so we see that on any horizontal pair, like Chokmah Bina, Hesed Gevurah, or Hod Netzach, we always have a matched pair of fire and water. Now with Hesed and Gevurah, we flip the polarity. So there's not just like a horizontal equilibrium, but a kind of vertical equilibrium and an interchange here as well that, is a complex and profound pattern. And we can also see how air is really being portrayed here as the as either the unity that precedes the division into the polarity of fire and water, or as the child and product of them. So we have Kether attributed to air, and then we can think of Kether like dividing into the polarity of Chokmah and Bina. But then we have the polarity of Hesed and Gevurah, of fire and water, uniting to produce their unity or synthesis as the air of Tefereth. And so this pattern, we find it in all three triads: the supernal triad, what's sometimes called the ethical triad in the middle of the tree, and then what's sometimes called the Yetziratic triad, or like the triad of the personality of Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. And then finally, all three of these forces of fire, water, and air all unite together to finally produce Malkuth, the earth, which is like the consolidation of all three of those forces. All right, and then on the right, I also have, this is one way of putting the planets on the Tree of Life. Sometimes, of course, Saturn will be up here in Binah, but I have it here in Da'ath to really emphasize this idea of balance. And you'll see this is also arranged in the outline of the hexagram, if you're familiar with how the planets get attributed to the hexagram. So we see, of course, the sun in the center, which is, in the modern, heliocentric cosmology, we know that, the sun to be the center of the universe. And then we see the planets arranged around that center in a balanced way, so that if you look, the planets that are opposite each other, kind of going across the sun, those are the planets whose signs are opposite to each other in the zodiac. So here we see Mercury opposite to Jupiter, and we'll remember that Gemini is opposite Sagittarius, and Virgo is opposite to Pisces. Similarly, Mars is opposite Venus, and Aries is opposite Libra, and Scorpio is opposite Taurus. And then we also have Saturn. Now Saturn opposite the moon. Of course, we have Saturn ruling Capricorn opposite the moon ruling Cancer, and then we also have Saturn ruling Aquarius opposite the sun ruling Leo. So even the planets here on the tree are arranged in in this balanced equilibrium of opposites. And something that I think is so important here about this image of balance and about the way that the tree shows us these interrelationships and these different points of balance is actually a very practical thing. In Living Thelema, David Shoemaker has some really wonderful discussions about the idea of balance and about how to respond to imbalance if there's a noticed imbalance. And one of the principles that he puts forward is the idea that if you find yourself imbalanced in any one direction, you should seek balance by bringing in the opposite quality rather than by trying to diminish the thing that you're finding there to be too much of. But being able to do this relies on first being able to understand your own life, your own personality, your own experience in terms of these symbols, so that if you can understand, right, that if that work of attributing both the parts of the self and ultimately all things to the symbols of the elements, to the planets, to the signs of the zodiac, to the Hebrew letters, this will give you a language to be able to find balance. If you're feeling off balance or kind of out of sorts, if you have that magical language developed to be able to think, I'm feeling kind of martial, I'm feeling like aggressive, or I'm feeling like I've been getting into a lot of conflict lately, or I've been feeling a little hot and dry. We can then say, okay, so I identify that as like the signature of Mars. So to seek balance, then you think, well, what balance is Mars? Well, it would be Venus. So then you could do invocations of Venus, or just use the symbol of Venus as the idea of what to bring into your life. Where Venus symbolizes, like harmony. That's what needs to be added to your life, rather than thinking, oh, I'm being too martial, I need to get rid of some of this Mars energy. Instead, think of what's the balance of this thing to be able to achieve equilibrium. So this becomes like a really practical thing for navigating daily life and navigating the world, and thinking about the process of self-development too. Crowley always emphasizes the importance of developing all of our characteristics. So if we naturally tend to be, to be very intellectual people, then rather than saying, oh, I need to stop being so intellectual, I need to, stop doing those activities, instead think, no, I just need to bring in, a more emotional wisdom or more physical practice. I need to be more in touch with my body to bring in the things that we're lacking rather than getting rid of things that we have too much of. Let's see, just looking through a couple comments coming in here. So that's an interesting question there about Da'ath and Saturn. That's a little, we don't, it kind of gets into like a big topic that we don't really have time for right now. But I will be doing some classes coming up on astrology and on astrological magic. And we'll definitely do some more detailed discussion of the planets in relationship to the Sephiroth. So good question. But unfortunately, we need to keep moving because we're already running a little behind on time. All right, I just wanted to show just a couple more images of balance here. And here, this is about balance like in energetic work and in the body as well. So in the center there, we have the image of the caduceus, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And the caduceus is really related to the you'll see Saturn sometimes, probably most commonly attributed to Binah, but sometimes also to Da'ath. I was just putting it in Da'ath to really emphasize the geometry of the balance of the planets there. But you'll see it both ways for different purposes. All right, so in the symbol of the caduceus there, which you see at the center, we have this same sort of structure as in the tree of life of a middle pillar and then two like contending but balanced forces. And so even the way the serpents wind up the tree is very much like the way that fire and water exchanged signs as they wound up the tree that we saw. I'll just jump back for a second. On the previous slides, if you think of the middle pillar being like the center of the caduceus, and then one serpent being fiery and one being watery, we can see how they wind around each other. Right? They exchange positions and coil like up the middle pillar. On the left there, you can also see, this is something I talked about in some previous classes in more detail, but the caduceus can also be related to the three mother letters. So in the center, we have Aleph attributed to air, and at the bottom, we have Mem attributed to water, and at the top, Sheen attributed to fire. So again, we see that air in the center with the polarities of fire and water above and below, and then as well as to the left and right. So again, that kind of multidimensional, multi-axis sense of balance. And that symbol of the caduceus is also very much related to the three principal nadis within the Indian esoteric anatomy system, where you have the central channel in the spine, the sushumna, and then the fiery and watery or solar and lunar channels called the pingala and the ida that wind around that central channel. So when we're doing like pranayama and breath work, especially in the early stages, one of the things we're really doing is seeking a balance between that fiery and watery channel, of getting them both to be open and to balance and equilibrate them and be able to move the energy from one to the other and back again and circulating them. So the pingala, the fiery or solar channel, that terminates in the right nostril, and then the ida, the lunar or watery channel, terminates in the left nostril. And so by doing that cross nostril breathing, you're balancing those two channels, and then eventually opening them up to that balanced circulation that eventually allows the energy to come up the central, the channel or the sushumna. Yeah, if any of you have read Gopi Krishna's book, the Kundalini, the Evolutionary Energy in Man, he has some really interesting stuff about this idea of the balance of of these channels. He actually has, in an unbalanced Kundalini awakening, he has the Kundalini awaken up the pingala only, and he has some extremely unpleasant experiences because of that unbalanced awakening of the energy. So his story is a nice kind of cautionary tale about the need for balance in energetic work. And one other thing here about yoga before we move on, we can also think of balance as a very physical, literal thing. When we're practicing asana, a lot of getting the asana to lock in and achieve that balanced state that we can really stay more or less motionless in for long periods of time. A lot of that is about balancing the spine, about not leaning forward and not leaning backward, and then having to engage our muscles to keep us upright, but of finding that balanced place where the spine can simply rest easily. And you'll see in some, like in some Zen teaching, for example, which really emphasizes the practice of sitting, they really use that metaphor of like the physical balance of the spine in seated meditation as like a metaphor for navigating life, of not like leaning into things, like grasping at things or being attached to them, and not leaning away, like avoiding things, but of being upright and balanced between those polarities of trying to grasp at something and trying to reject something, but being upright and balanced in the center. So that experience of the physical, seeking of physical balance really translates to balance on subtler levels, which I think is really profound. Thanks, William. Good to see you. All right, so moving right along here. This is from Postcards to Probationers, just an excerpt here. Which again touches on this idea of balance, and also touches on the idea of balance on multiple planes. So this is a section here that called the method of equilibrium. So the equilibrium of the passions. 1, since the ultimate truth of teleology is unknown, all codes of morality are arbitrary. So again, this is a skeptical sort of idea that we don't, teleology here is like the inquiry into purpose and the reasons for things, defined as what their end or what their end goal is. But Crowley is saying that this is unknown, which means that all codes of morality are arbitrary because we don't know the final purpose of existence. Therefore, the student has no concern with ethics as such. He is consequently free to do his duty in that state of life to which it has pleased God to call him. So again, this idea of, obviously in the third section there, we're talking about the true will, because we don't know the final ultimate purpose of things, and we have a skeptical suspension, and we'll talk about that idea of skeptical suspension in just a minute, of the different ideas about the purpose of the universe. We are therefore free to be able to follow our true will and to follow the life that we have been called to. So this is one way of seeking balance. All right, and then the equilibrium of the reason. Since truth is super-rational, meaning that truth goes beyond rational statements, because rational statements are always, in dualistic terms, and truth is something that transcends that, any rational statement is false. Let the student then contradict every proposition that presents itself to him, right? So with each proposition, you contradict it and assert its opposite. And again, we'll see this idea more as we go along here. Rational ideas being thus expelled from the mind, there is room for the apprehension of spiritual truth. It should be remarked that this does not destroy the validity of reasonings on their own plane. So again, this is an idea that we've been talking about the ultimate truth and relative truth, that just because any rational statement is ultimately false, because truth is transcendent, doesn't mean that that reasoning and logic have no function. They do. They just need to be restricted to their own plane and not allowed to be the lords of everything, right? They just need to do their function. Right, and then finally the equilibrium in the spiritual sensorium. Sensorium is like a sensory apparatus. So the spiritual sensorium is that the spiritual function or the spiritual organ, you could almost say, that allows us to have spiritual experience and to apprehend spiritual realities. All right, so man being a finite being, he is incapable of apprehending the infinite, nor does his communion with infinite being, true or false, alter this fact. Right, so here's another kind of skepticism, that because we are finite, we can't possibly apprehend the infinite, and so we should always be humble about that, right? That although we can have communion with infinite being, we can never fully apprehend it insofar as we are finite individuals. Let then the student contradict every vision and refuse to enjoy it. First, because there is certainly another vision possible of precisely contradictory nature. Second, because though he is God, he is also a man upon an insignificant planet. So again, really echoing some of those ideas that we saw in Liber Librae about the balance of having self-respect, but of remembering that we are just a small part of a very large cosmos, and also understanding that that no vision that we might have, nothing that comes to us in our spiritual work is necessary, is the final absolute thing, and so that we're not getting attached to any particular idea or any particular vision or experience. And so we're remaining balanced in that way. All right, so then being thus equilibrated laterally and vertically, again, that idea of equilibrium on all planes or in multi-dimensions, it may be that either by affirmation or denial of all these things together, he may attain the supreme trance. And as we'll go a little bit further, we'll see this idea that this is not only a practical way of staying balanced, but also a spiritual practice, in a mystical practice in its own right. All right, so just shifting gears a little bit, I was originally going to spend a little more time on the history of philosophical skepticism, but I'm just going to shorten it to a few slides. That I think will be helpful for our discussion here, but this is definitely not going to be a complete presentation of the history of philosophical skepticism. In ancient skepticism, the skeptic or the skeptical school that is most relevant to what we're talking about is what's called Pyronian Skepticism, which is the school of skeptical thought found by Pyrrho. The big distinction to be made between like Pyrrhonian skepticism and what's called academic skepticism, which was the skepticism practiced in Plato's Academy within a few generations after Plato. The Academy really took like a skeptical turn. Now for the Platonic Academy, the academic skepticism, they really felt pretty confident in saying that that knowledge was impossible. We could never really know truth, but they were able to assert that idea. And so this is sometimes called like non-iterative skepticism, the idea that you can know that you can't have knowledge. Whereas Pyrrhonian skepticism is iterative skepticism. So you're not only skeptical about like particular propositions about the world, but you're also skeptical about the idea that you need to be skeptical about individual propositions about the world, that those skeptical ideas keep like applying back to themselves. So that where the academics were more confident in saying that knowledge was impossible, a Pyrrhonian skeptic would be skeptical about the idea that knowledge was impossible. So it's a more open system that doesn't come to like final conclusions and is more open and dynamic, but also runs into some interesting kind of philosophical problems and paradoxes that need to be worked out. But yeah, I'll just read a couple of quotes here from some ancient authors. Pyrrho himself never wrote anything, so we only have secondhand accounts of what he taught and the way he lived. So, so this is a quote from Aristocles. He says that Pyrrho declared that things are equally indifferent, unmeasurable, and inarbitrable. For this reason, neither our sensation nor our opinion tells us truths or falsehoods. Therefore, for this reason, we should not put our trust in them one bit, but we should be unopinionated, uncommitted, and unwavering, saying concerning each individual thing that it no more is than is not, or it both is and is not, or it neither is nor is not. The outcome for those who actually adopt this attitude, says Timon, who is another skeptical figure in the history of skepticism, will be first speechlessness, and then freedom from disturbances, or freedom from disturbance. And so this idea of freedom from disturbance, in Greek, this is ataraxia, which is a kind of peace, because in that skeptical suspension, in refusing to take sides in these different debates and remaining skeptical and balanced between different propositions, we can find a place of peace or of balance, and of not having to worry about, ooh, am I right? Am I wrong? You know, am I following along with truth, or am I misled? All of those things can be suspended in a balanced state that allows us peace and freedom. Oh yeah, and Sarah's mentioning Descartes here, and we'll be talking about Descartes in just a minute. Yep. All right, and then Diogenes, in his, this is Diogenes Laertius, who gives biography in his Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers, gives a lot of biographies of important ancient philosophers. And so he talks about how Pyrrho, Pyrrho traveled all the way to India. He accompanied Alexander, the conquering army of Alexander the Great, and so he spent time in Persia and hung out with the Magi, the Zoroastrian priests, and also went to India as well. And so Diogenes says here, he even went as far as the Gymnosophists. Now the Gymnosophists it's not exactly clear who they are, but it's probably something like the yogis or like proto-yogis, the Indian ascetic traditions, renunciates, and people doing spiritual yogic practices. So he went as far as the Gymnosophists in India and the Magi. Again, the Magi being the Zoroastrian priests. Owing to which circumstance, he seems to have taken a noble line in philosophy, introducing the doctrine of incomprehensibility and of the necessity of suspending one's judgment. So what's thought is that Pyrrho was influenced by early Buddhism and by Indian thought in general. And in the exchange, there was quite a bit of cultural exchange between Greece and India at that time, a lot more than I think a lot of us commonly think there was. But that Pyronian skepticism also really influenced Indian thought. And so there's a few centuries later, there's an important Buddhist figure, Nagarjuna, who very likely, people have speculated anyways, that Nagarjuna was really influenced by that Pyronian skepticism and that absolute skepticism that refuses to make any assertions, but also refuses to assert that they refuse to make any assertions, right? That idea of iterative skepticism is really taken up by Nagarjuna and becomes part of his mystical practice, of practice that actually aims, to enlightenment and nirvana. And we can think about how that, we saw in the previous slide, the idea that the skepticism leads to the freedom from worry, that freedom from disturbances. That's in its highest sense would be something like nirvana, a kind of total liberation and freedom from suffering. So Nagarjuna's thought is really, really complex. I'm just going to give you a few verses here from the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, which is like something like the root verses on the middle way, that means. Just so you can get a little bit of a taste of this, and so you can see some of the relationship between his thought about nirvana and about the Buddha nature and its relationship to skeptical methods. So Nagarjuna says, empty should not be asserted. Now, by empty here, he means, this is the Sanskrit word shunyata, which refers to things being empty of their own sort of inherent nature. Because things are interdependent, and a variety of other analyses that they go through, things don't have a single stable like self nature, but are rather said to be empty, which we could also translate it as boundless. It's not empty in some sort of like negative or desolate sense. All right, so empty should not be asserted. Non-empty should not be asserted. Neither both nor neither should be asserted. They are both used nominally. And now in the next phrase, he uses the phrase tetralemma. The tetralemma is something being asserted. There's like 4 kind of propositions. The thing can be asserted. It cannot be asserted. It can be both asserted and not asserted, or it can be neither asserted nor not asserted. So those 4 things are called the tetralemma. How can the tetralemma of permanent and impermanent, etc., meaning permanent, impermanent, both permanent and impermanent, and neither permanent nor impermanent, be true of the peaceful, right? And so the peaceful here is the Buddha or someone who's attained nirvana. How can the tetralemma of the finite, infinite, etc., be true of the peaceful? Since he is empty by nature, the thought that the Buddha exists or does not exist after nirvana is not appropriate. Whatever is the essence of the Tathagata, the Tathagata means something like the one thus gone, and it's a name used to refer to the Buddha. Whatever is the essence of the Tathagata, that is the essence of the world. The Tathagata has no essence. The world is without essence. So we can see that this isn't just a theory about knowledge and about our ability to apprehend knowledge, but is actually has become something about the statement of the nature of things itself, that the Buddha nature and ultimate truth are actually beyond. It's not just that there's some truth to it, but that we can't apprehend it, but that it's actually beyond any category that we could ever even possibly use to express their nature. All right, we're running a little short on time, so I'm going to skip over something, but if we have time, I will come back to it. So I'm just going to skip here to Descartes and to Cartesian skepticism. So René Descartes, French philosopher, often taken to be the kind of the first of the modern philosophers and the real founder of the modern philosophical tradition. So he employs a method that's often called Cartesian skepticism or Cartesian doubt, or the method of doubt, or sometimes methodological skepticism. And so this is not so much skepticism as a definite position, or the refusal of the ideas of knowledge, or saying that we can't attain knowledge, or advocating that we remain in skeptical suspension about these ideas, but about using doubt and using skepticism as a method for getting to truth. So if you've read Meditations on First Philosophy, if you've ever taken an intro, philosophical class or something, you'll probably remember that Descartes goes through this process trying to doubt everything that he can doubt. And he uses, arguments about the idea that dreams seem real while we're in them. So we can doubt whether we're dreaming right now or whether we're really awake. And he also uses this idea of an evil demon who could trick him or fool him about various things. He could say that, I think that I'm in this room, but I'm really being deceived by the demon who's influencing my perceptions. So he tears down anything that he can't know for certain. And eventually the thing that he comes to a certainty about is that the thing the demon cannot deceive him about is that he exists, right? So there's that quote there. He says, we cannot doubt of our existence while we doubt. He later expresses this as the cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. But when he's saying think, he doesn't necessarily mean rational thought. We might think of think as have consciousness or any sort of conscious activity. So that if we doubt our own existence, there has to be something that doubts, which means that we must exist, so that our own existence is a point is something that we can be sure about. Which is interesting because in like the Buddhist tradition, in Nagarjuna, he would actually really doubt his own existence and have complex philosophical arguments about that. So we don't necessarily have to agree with Descartes, but I think the significant thing is about using doubt as a method for apprehending truth and for always looking for, could we be deceived? In what ways could we be deceived? You know, this might look like one thing, but how could it possibly be, you know, something else? And so this approach really lays the grounds for the scientific method that we, you know, in modern science, you know, Descartes' ideas are really seen as the foundation for those things. Let's see, and yeah, Sarah's adding some details here about that essay that was talking about the Meditations on First Philosophy. Yeah, they're really interesting, and they're pretty accessible too. I mean, they're not terribly long, and not really jargon laden. So they're quite accessible if people would like to look into them. But anyways, I think the main thing to get here is just that we have these two different approaches to. We have like the more ancient approach to skepticism, as well as this modern and more scientific approach to skepticism. And Crowley's really influenced by both of those things. So here we see the cover of one of the issues of the Equinox, the journal that Crowley published. And a couple of things here. When we see that this slogan that's very famous, I'm sure you're all familiar with, the method of science, the aim of religion. And now this idea of the method of science, the aim of religion, Crowley kind of paraphrases this idea a few different times. And so you see a few different versions of that same idea. I've got on the bullet points on the right. I think it's worth spending a little thinking about what we mean about the method of science. I mean, one thing, of course, is that scientific methods have changed over the last 100 years. When we think about scientific method, we're probably thinking largely about statistical methods and the double-blind procedures and things like that. But if you look back at like 19th century science, it doesn't always look like that. You know, if you look at like Darwin or something like that, the way that he's undertaking scientific investigation. So I just encourage people not to jump too quickly to thinking that there's some one definite thing called the method of science. But again, that it's just this tradition coming out of Descartes and modern skepticism. All right, so some other ways that Crowley expresses this idea about the method of science, the aim of religion. He calls it scientific illuminism, right? Illuminism is like the seeking of enlightenment. So a scientific approach to seeking enlightenment. He also calls it skeptical theurgy. Theurgy, of course, is like divine magic, and ultimately using magical and ritual and devotional procedures to unite the individual magician with the divine, but being done in a skeptical way. So it's a skeptical approach to theurgy. So we can think about this both as like a balance that we're undertaking, we're doing ritual work, we're invoking spirits and gods and these sorts of things, but we're also remaining skeptical and we're refusing to commit to either definitely believing in these things as like independent, separate entities, or the opposite, right? So we're using that kind of skeptical suspension allows us to neither to get in our own way by excessively doubting that these things might be real, but also not to become imbalanced by becoming like fanatical or having faith in them that might mislead us. He also calls it sort of pretentiously Pyrrho-Zoroastrianism. So we just talked about Pyrrho a moment ago and in the Pyronian Skepticism. And by Zoroastrianism here, I think Crowley just means, like he's using Zoroaster as the kind of archetypal prophet, but about direct spiritual experience. All right, so now a really important document about all of this, and especially about skepticism, is Crowley's essay, The Soldier and the Hunchback. I'm not going to say too much about it here, mainly because our students in the Temple of the Silver Star all work with this document. They study it and complete an assignment on it. So I don't want to take away from that experience. It's not the easiest essay, but it's really worth spending a lot of time with, and and all of our students do that. So you could think of a lot of what I'm talking about here today as a kind of supplement to that part of the curriculum. But I just wanted to mention just the basic symbols of the soldier and the hunchback. So the soldier, who's the exclamation point, this is about direct spiritual experience, or about what we might call gnosis, a kind of direct spiritual knowledge that exceeds or is transcendent of normal rational categories. And then the hunchback represents skepticism in doubting and questioning. And so while skepticism itself can be seen as a balanced thing of being balanced between two propositions, we can also think about a bigger scale balance between skepticism itself and direct spiritual experience, and that there's a balance between these two things, or a movement back and forth. We have a spiritual experience, we have some kind of gnosis or understanding or enlightenment, but then we can also question it and have doubt, and then that process of questioning and doubt leads us to our next experience. And so there can be kind of a movement or a rhythm back and forth between direct experience and between the skeptical inquiry concerning that experience. All right, let's see, just moving on here because we've only got a few minutes left. So this is the Book of Lies is a really, there's so much throughout the entire Book of Lies that's really relevant to skepticism and to doubt and to ideas about contradiction. So if you really want to dive into this idea, the entire Book of Lies is really great, although it's not an easy work. But just one chapter here in particular, and I think it'll be very obvious how it relates to what we've been talking about here. So this is chapter 51. The number 51 has the symbol that 51 is the value in Hebrew of words meaning both pain and failure. So that's he connecting that to the idea of doubt. But instead of seeing doubt as like a problem or an obstacle, he's really celebrating doubt here. So the title of this chapter is Terrier Work, and this is a reference to fox hunting. So we'll see here that there's the image of hunting a fox is used. All right, so the chapter goes, doubt. Doubt thyself. Doubt even if thou doubtest thyself. Doubt all. Doubt even if thou doubtest all. And so we can really see that Pyronian iterative skepticism here, where you're doubting everything. You're even doubting if you're doubting everything, right? That this process is, and I think the implication being that this never stops. So doubt even if thou doubtest all. Doubt even if thou doubtest that thou doubtest all, right? Like it goes on forever. And in that kind of infinite recursive doubt process, there can be a kind of transcending or an overcoming of this process. Right, so that he says, it seems sometimes as if beneath all conscious doubt there lay some deepest certainty. Oh, kill it, slay the snake, the horn of the double goat be exalted. The symbols of the snake and goat are really interesting, but unfortunately we don't have time to really get into it today. But just the idea of doubt being exalted and seeking to find certainty and to slay it by doubt. All right, let's see. Dive deeper, ever deeper into that abyss of mind. So the idea that in this process of doubt, we're diving deeper and deeper into the abyss of mind. And as we doubt, deeper and deeper layers of reality, we are moving deeper and deeper into this sort of endless space within the mind. All right, and so now some of this fox hunting symbolism comes back. Dive deeper, ever deeper into the abyss of mind, until thou unearth the fox that. So when Crowley uses that in all capital letters, he's using that as a kind of symbol or a way of referring to some kind of transcendental experience of truth. So the fox that's being sought here is some sort of transcendental truth that transcends this entire process of doubt. And now the rest of this here is just sort of fox hunting language. It says, on hounds, yoicks, tally ho, bring that to bay. Right, to bring like the quarry to bay is to corner it and surround it and capture it. he says, then wind the mort. Wind the mort means like blow the horn. It's a horn that they blew in fox hunting. So again, just using that image of hunting something and of seeking it. All right, and then very last thing here, and I think this is in some ways kind of the capstone of this whole discussion, and of really talking about the way that skepticism becomes, again, not just a way of seeking balance, or as like the thing the balance between the skepticism and the doubt and spiritual experience, but the way that process of skepticism and doubt can actually become a mystical method in its own right. And so I think the best presentation of that idea, you'll find this idea all throughout Crowley's writings, but I think it's presented sort of most fully, though not always the easiest to understand, in Liber Aleph. So I'm going to give you a few excerpts from some of the chapters in Liber Aleph, but I encourage you to go and look at that whole section towards the end of Liber Aleph if you really want to get the full discussion here, because I'm not going to be able to include all of the details of what's in there. All right, so yeah, just some excerpts here. So he says, now for the chief of that which was, with Liber Aleph, it's important to remember that he's writing this as a letter to Frederick Had, who is Charles Stansfield Jones, who Crowley, at least at this time, considered to be like his magical son. So this is a letter of instruction written to Jones as his magical son, and he's writing the whole letter in this intentionally like archaic sort of style. Yeah, all right, so let's just jump into it. Now for the chief of that which was granted unto me, it was the apprehension of those will changes or transmutations of the mind which lead into truth, being as ladders unto heaven. So we're going to have the image of a ladder here and of something that allows you to climb up, but also the idea that it's not, the ladder isn't necessarily like true in itself. It's simply a thing that allows you to climb. What chapter is this? So this is the chapter Digamma Phi. The chapters are given with like Greek numbering, so that in parentheses after each excerpt, that's the chapter number in Greek from Liber Aleph. Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't write down the which like Roman number it was. I can look it up for you though if you'd like. It's towards the end. Anyways, just moving on here. I believe generally, on grounds both of theory and experience, so little as I have, that a man must first be initiate and established in our law before he may use this method. So that's something interesting to think about, that you, in some sense, have to be an initiate and have to be, and again, we can take initiate, and it doesn't necessarily mean like a formal initiate of AA or any other order, but that, you know, there has to be some, this isn't like a method for beginners, it's a slightly advanced method, and there has to be at least some level of contact already with a transcendental reality or a magical reality before you'll be able to fully use this method. So just something to keep in mind. And also the idea that we have to be established in the law, the understanding and the internalization of the law of Thelema is important as a guide and as a way of maintaining our balance through this method of doubt. All right. So he says, for in it is an implication of our secret enlightenment concerning the universe, how its nature is utterly perfection. Now every thought is a separation, and the medicine of that is to marry each one with its contradiction, as I have showed formerly in many writings. Right, so that every thought is a separation, right? Because all rational thoughts, all specific propositions, they involve themselves with duality. So it's always separated from its opposite. And so the medicine of that, meaning like the healing of that separation, is to marry each thing to its contradiction. So he says, and thou shalt clap the one to the other with vehemence of spirit, swiftly as light itself, that the ecstasy be spontaneous. So it's not just that we're overcoming contradiction, but in the unifying of opposites and in the overcoming of contradiction, there's actually the production of spiritual ecstasy. Verily, the nature of this method is solution, right? Meaning like the dissolving of something. The nature of this method is solution and the destruction of every complexity by explosion of ecstasy, as every element thereof is fulfilled by its correlative and is annihilated, since it loseth separate existence, and the orgasm that is consummated within the bed of thy mind. I think that's a really great image, right? That the orgasm that is consummated within the bed of thy mind, that the marriage of these opposite ideas within your own consciousness is a kind of sexual union and produces an ecstatic state, from that. This method is continuous and proceedeth ever from the gross to the fine, and from the particular to the general, dissolving all things into, or that should say, the one substance of light, and dissolve all things into the one substance of light. So again, the idea that you're starting from gross ideas and ever by contradicting ideas, and then whatever results from that, contradicting those ideas, and constantly marrying every idea to its opposite, we proceed from the gross to the fine, from the particular to the general, and that all things, all of our ideas, our experiences, our apprehensions, all of these things are ultimately dissolved into the one substance of light. All right, and then last slide here, and then we'll be done. Learn now that impressions of sensory experience, things that come through our senses, have opposites readily conceived, as long to short or light to dark, and so with emotions and perceptions, as love to hate or false to true. But the more violent is the antagonism, the more it is bound in illusion, determined by relation. Thus the word long hath no meaning, save it be referred to a standard. But love is not thus obscure, because hate is its twin, partaking bountifully of a common nature therewith. Now hear this. It was given unto me in my visions of the aethers, right? He's talking about the scrying of the aethers that are recorded in the vision and the voice. Now hear this. It was given unto me in my visions of the aethers when I was in the wilderness of Sahara by Tolga, that above the abyss contradiction is unity, and that nothing could be true save by virtue of the contradiction that is contained in itself, right? So that if we think of the tree of life, we're talking about like at the level of the supernals, above the abyss. Contradiction is actually the mark of truth, that things contain their own opposites, and that's how sort of rarefied and exalted the ideas are at the supernal level. Behold, therefore, in this method, thou shalt come presently to ideas of this order, that include in themselves their own contradiction and have no antithesis. Here then is thy lever of antinomy, right? Like the idea of using like antinomy as a lever or as a ladder to lift us up. Thy lever of antinomy broken in thine hand, yet being in true balance, thou mayest soar, passionate and eager, from heaven to heaven, by the expansion of thine idea and its exaltation of concentration, as thou understandest by thy studies in the book of the law. The word thereof concerning Our Lady Nuit and Hadit that is at the core of every star. And this last going upon thy ladder is easy, if thou be truly initiate, for the momentum of thy force and transcendental antithesis serveth to propel thee, and the emancipation from the fetters of thought that thou hast won in that praxis of art maketh the whirlpool and gravitation of truth of competence to draw thee unto itself. Oh yeah, I was just saying when he's talking about the visions of the aethers, he's just referring to the vision and the voice. But this quote is from Liber Aleph, right? So yeah, I mean, there's a lot here and a lot to unpack. But hopefully, like what we've said going into this, makes some of this comprehensible. And I think a lot of this are things that you have to actually practice and begin to experience yourself for a lot of these things to make sense. But I just think that the really significant thing here to take is that this skeptical method and the idea of the uniting of opposites, or even of things that contain their own opposites, that this isn't just like a way of remaining balanced and remaining skeptical and like open to new information. It's not just like a pragmatic thing, but it's actually a mystical method in its own right. And that if practiced to the highest level, that he's describing here, it actually leads to mystical experience in its own right. And so it isn't just like a balance of spiritual practice, but actually becomes a spiritual practice all by itself. So yeah, we're at just over an hour and a half here. So that'll wrap us up for this. Yeah, I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes if anybody has any additional questions or comments or anything like that. And as I said, there's so much more that we could have included in this. This is really just an overview of what I think are some of the highlights of these topics in Crowley's work. But yeah, I mean, these themes I think you can find in almost everything that Crowley's written, and in Temple of the Silver Star, in our training system, you'll find these ideas and things related to these ideas everywhere. So really important things to pay attention to and to practice and to try to live and to put into practice in all spheres of our lives. And yeah, I hope this has been helpful for your studies and for your practice. So yeah, thanks everybody. Yeah, I appreciate the comments and everything. It was great to have you all here. And yeah, I'll get this recording up on YouTube in the next few days. If anybody wants to, to revisit any parts of it, or anybody who wasn't able to be here today. All right, so yeah, anybody watching on YouTube, yeah, thanks for watching. You can subscribe to our channel and get updates as new class recordings are posted. So yeah, thanks for watching. 93s, everybody.